I asked one of our members, Martin Davis, who's a professor emeritus of pediatric dentistry and the former associate dean at the College of Dental Medicine, that even though he spent his whole life as at the other end of the age spectrum, if he could recommend a speaker to us, and he immediately thought of Lynn Tepper, who is a behavioral scientist and with clinical professorships both in medicine, in dentistry, and at the Mailman School in Sociomedical Sciences. So she has extensive expertise in many areas, a long history of federal and foundation funding. And when we talked, the area that she selected to talk to us about was sleep disorders and aging, which I thought was very appropriate. And she's very well equipped to do this. Among her many accomplishments, she's authored 3 textbooks on aging, issues in aging, numerous articles and chapters on health promotion and disease prevention in later life. She's a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America and was a delegate to the last White House Conference on Aging. So this morning at 3:23, at the unusual time I inexplicably seem to be waking up these days, I started thinking about how I was really looking forward to the talk. I did my stab at the New York Times spelling bee puzzle on my iPad, carefully set to those sleepy blue colors at night, assured myself I'm still a genius at anagrams, and then try to go back to sleep. So Lynn, I have a very big interest in your talk because I really don't like to get up at 3:23 every morning. I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Marty. Thank you for suggesting that I do this. And thank you, Jean, for helping. And a big roundup of applause for Diana, who's helping me through this Zoom. I'm usually spoiled, as most of us were, with a teaching assistant that does all this. So I'm a little shaky with the technology. I think before we look at the PowerPoints, I'll just say, you're supposed to do a disclaimer before you talk about anything. The major disclaimer is that I'm not an expert on sleep disorders. In fact, I changed the title not to reflect that. However, this reflects an early part of my life that I don't even know if Marty is aware of. Back in the 70s, when I was an army psychologist working in Berlin with guys that were coming back from Vietnam in the 70s, and doing counseling that had to do with what we now call, PTSD, post-traumatic, and what seemed to be a very common thread among these folks was the fact that they had sleep problems. And that brought me into a point where I started to learn a lot about sleep and gave some talks to the soldiers about sleep, did some groups, kind of group therapy with them involving their sleep problems and so forth and so on. So that was like a very early part of my life that, was resurrected about 15 years ago when the Columbia College of Dental Medicine started an amazing community outreach program in the Washington Heights, Harlem area. And we went into senior housing and senior programs and so forth and gave talks about various things. And what was important to them at the time, the seniors, most important for questions seemed to be sleeping problems. That became a new area for me to do some work up at the old Allen, the new Allen Hospital. They have a health outreach program for seniors in the neighborhood. So I've been doing a regular talk to them about sleep and aging that I've enjoyed and they've enjoyed. So I figured I'd just, kick it up a notch for you guys, since you're all retired professors at Columbia and have some questions that hopefully I can answer. So I kicked it up a couple of notches. I was told not to use any technical language or talk about anything having to do with politics or sex, but I'll definitely mention sex, and I'll definitely mention oral health when it comes to sleep disorders or sleep changes as we get older. So if Diana would be so kind as to share the screen? Thank you. I think, but once I do a full view of this, you may not be able. Oh, good. Excellent. Wow. I'll just say that I have another selfish reason for choosing this topic is that, we all are older and we all are experiencing some of these things. It is not, go back. It's not something that is unique to older people, but it seems to be becoming more of a problem. I am your age. I already see 3 people I know in the EPIC organization that I know are younger than I am. So I'm right there with you. So what I want to talk about really is what we know and what we can change. So I hope what we know will help plug into your behavior somehow, what we can change. Okay. Next slide is my grandson, my first grandson, Jack. And I use this picture. I mean, now he's applying to college, would you believe? This is the best sleep that Jack will ever have. And this is the best sleep that all of us will ever have. It's not that it's downhill all the way, but our sleep, we'll talk about the sleep cycle changes as we get older. A baby's sleep is something that we will never, ever see again. That's been substantiated with research. And nowadays we have sleep labs and sleep techs and so forth that have substantiated that. Okay. Next, Diana. I just thought I'd throw this in. Over the last couple of years, sleep has been big business, big on research, big on getting the word out to the public about sleep. And an entire National Geographic, my favorite magazine, put a plug in, did a whole issue on the science of sleep. And next, Diana, is another favorite of mine, Consumer Report, about sleeping better. Again, a whole issue about sleep-related matters. So sleeping is hot, sleeping is exciting to talk about, and even more important is something that people want to know more about. Okay. Next. All right, purpose of sleep. All right, I've listed a few here. If Diana, you want to hit the forward button. There's some reasons that we sleep. I mean, it renews our mental health. You can just keep going, Diana. It renews our physical health, maintains our immune response. And I think there's one more. Is there? That's it. No, that's about it. The last one is something that we're talking about a lot these days with immune response because of COVID, obviously. So sleep becomes even more important to many people, knowing that immune response is something that we should be concerned about. Next. All right, contemporary wisdom. I call this Sleep 101. Basically, if you go back in time, even to our parents' time, or maybe early in our lives, but certainly our parents, people looked at sleep as a block of time that happened at the end of the day, and basically sleep was the absence of wakefulness. That's all that people knew about it. We didn't know anything was going on. And contemporary wisdom says it's a very active process. It's part of a circadian cycle, a 24-year. You all know what circadian means. I don't have to define that for you. It's part of a cycle that's normal and important, and certainly incredible things are happening while you're sleeping. Next. So the physiology of sleep is regulated by two, again, not to get too technical, but brain processes that are going on. One is, of course, the restorative process. While you sleep, sleep is a natural response to being awake. And we know that the more hours you're awake, the stronger the drive is to sleep. That's basic knowledge. And the timing of the sleep-wake cycle, that is cyclical, and it's part of we actually know what part of the brain it is, suprachiasmatic nucleus, and we know it's influenced by light. That's going to get into another area of talking. Next. Okay. What is it? Well, it's a combination of both of these things people are finding out. Light, certainly, and the clock. You know, do you have to get up at a certain time? Does the clock wake you up? What wakes you up? And that's an important part of what we call sleep hygiene, trying to improve your sleep. Next. And I should say there are all kinds of gadgets on the market with light so that people begin to wake up naturally, natural light in the bedroom. So we're all affected by light, and light seems to be a big deal. It really affects our circadian rhythm. I gave a talk at a conference in Reykjavik a couple of years ago, actually about 6 or 7 years ago. And at the end, it happened to be the end of June. And you know what happens at the end of June? It's the shortest day. And so it was dark like forever. No, sorry, I'm opposite. It was light forever. It was the longest day of the year. And it was almost impossible to fall asleep on, I think it was June 21st. So we know that it affects our circadian rhythm. You really are not right when you have too much light. Light affects our brain hormones. And as I mentioned before, the suprachiasmatic nuclei, the hypothalamus, the retinohypothalamic tract, all of these things. So sleep is not as simple as we all thought. It's not an empty period of time that we know nothing about, but we know that it's a very active brain period of time. Next. So again, a little bit more about the biochemistry, you know, where is it? Brainstem, basal forebrain, hypothalamus, it's all over the place, guys. It's a major brain process. They said there's another click. Okay. And these are, you know, just some of the brain chemistry that goes on. The brain chemicals, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. I'm sure you've heard of most of these, but all of these are very much related to sleep and whether or not you are sleeping well or not. Next. So I really don't have to explain too much about this. You know, the circadian rhythm regulates your whole system. It's active during the day, you're sleepy at night. And this is important though, when we sleep, lots of good things are happening. Your blood pressure is going way down, your kidney function changes, your memory is consolidated. And that, you know, I should highlight because the hippocampus, where memory is stored, you know, what you've done that day or in the past is stored, it consolidates it. It's almost like you were filing it in a file cabinet of everything that you've done that day. So sleep is important to get that in there and in the right place so that when you want to remember it and bring it back to your recent thoughts, you can do it. Okay, and again, this is kind of interesting too. The internal clocks show that between these times, we are most sleepy. Next. Just a short little story, you know, why the British have tea at 4 o'clock, or why some of us, you know, I say raise your hand if you fall into this category, would love to have a cup of coffee around 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when we kind of get the lowest gap in our ability to stay awake and be sharp. It happens at around 4 o'clock because it's midway in it's 12 hours after midway in your sleep cycle. So if you went to sleep at midnight and you got up at 6 in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon was your midway. So 3 o'clock in the morning was your midway. So 3 o'clock in the afternoon is when you shoot down the lowest. And that's been substantiated by lots of sleep experiences and research. Mostly, for those of you who went to Cornell, I'm sure you must have taken Moss's famous sleep course, big researcher. So, I mean, it regulates our day, blood pressure, and as a result of all these. So we really need this for restorative purposes and for being alert the next day. Next slide. And this is just a little sketch of the dip in our circulation. This may not be mine or yours or Diana's or Jean's or Janet's. It's about right. 9 o'clock in the morning to noon, you have a bit of a dip. Then you're up a little bit later. your level of alertness fluctuates pretty much like this, different for some people, but this kind of a fluctuation. Next. So research shows that it isn't just a nothing homogeneous, a blank state, homogeneous state, but really a very complex physiological process, which I'm sure I've convinced everybody by now. Next. All right, just some Gallup poll results. Gallup really looks at hundreds of thousands of people, and if you can put all the percentages up, Diana, 56% insomnia, 62% driving while drowsy. You can go back one. 27% have actually dozed off while driving. Teenagers complain of being tired during the day, 23%, 62% having had some sleep problem last year. And I think those last two are really the most striking, that so much of a majority of people report having some sleep problems. And that was before COVID, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. So we say, and the last thing that's very disturbing is 61% have never been asked about their sleep by their physician. It hasn't been part of their physical. Next. Okay, you can put all that up. Yeah, lots of consequences, cognitive, emotional, personality, physical performance. I'll explain them in the next slide. Next slide, Diana. So with the cognitive, it is memory, concentration, and focus. And that's something we kind of stereotype older folks as having memory problems and problems focusing, concentration. And there's been a lot of research on that. And so much of it has to do, not so much with memory and sometimes with hearing, but the fact that as we get older, for quite more people than you think, there is an attention deficit that happens where concentration and focus may change. So you may not be responding as you would ordinarily. And that is not because of a psychiatric diagnosis, but it could be very reflective on the fact that our sleep processes change. So we have more errors, in thinking, writing, and speaking when we're sleep deprived. Next. Emotional, irritability, frustration, more depression, more loss of sense of humor. So all of these things may change when you're not getting enough sleep. Next. Performance, more clumsy. There was a study actually done at Columbia by, if some of you may remember Ruth Bennett back in the 80s on falls in the elderly. And Janet, this is right up your alley, right, Janet? About when do you have more accidents and falls and some of the studies really looked at sleep as one of the factors. And of course, the environment that may not be suitable. And more injuries, more injuries. So we hope that back in the day, Dr. Davis wasn't having any sleep problems when he was doing dentistry on all those young children, right? Next. So who treats sleep disorders? And I mean, this is a long list of those that I'm aware of that have patients with sleep problems. And dentists do as well. Dentists have all kinds of equipment now, and I don't know what you would call them, but that would help not only diagnose it, but also treat, especially sleep apnea, certain kinds of very mild sleep apnea, or breathing problems, especially in their overweight patients and patients that sleep on their back. Maybe Marty can talk about this later, that a contraption of sorts that's in the mouth, almost like a bite plate that moves the jaw in a certain way so that people don't wake up gasping, as many people do as they get older because of physiological changes. Again, Janet, would know more about this. Next. So how do we know that things are happening? Well, I can say yes to some of these things. I'm sure you guys can as well. You're awakening more often. When you do get awake, it takes a little longer to go back to sleep. Little noises may wake you up, and it's very easy to doze off more easily while you're watching TV. I don't think a night goes by when I'm not dozing off halfway through an old Little House on the Prairie rerun at 9 o'clock. So that's something that you can pretty much expect. But these are all signs of sleep issues. And then settling down to sleep is more difficult. So we have a person falling asleep while watching TV, and it's, in a sense, that is a nap. And we know a nap after 3 o'clock in the afternoon is going to interfere with your sleep process at night. So if you're dozing off at 8, 9 o'clock at night as for a half hour to an hour, when you try to get back to sleep that night, you may have some kind of problems. Next. All right, fact or fiction. This is a true and false quiz for you professors out there. We need less sleep as we grow older. Not necessarily so, okay? We need sleep no matter how old we are. Napping during the day leads to sleep problems at night. I gave that one away. As people get older, they get less of the deeper stages. That is true. We'll talk about that next. And as people get older, they have more of these awakenings. And, little kids, babies, young children, maybe they have 5 or so awakenings during the night, whereas older people over 60 even have as many as 150 times a night that they have this awakening and sleep, going back to sleep, and they may not even realize it. But in sleep studies and sleep labs, they will see on their machines that you have had an awakening, and very often over 100 times during a night. Next. Okay, there we go. Go to the bathroom at least. Nobody here does that, right? So it's true at least once every night. And for some people, 2 or 3 or 4 times a night. So, that's another piece of what's referred to in the literature as sleep hygiene in terms of limiting your fluid after 8 o'clock. Next. Okay, moving on. Next. All right, this is just, I'm sure you all know about REM, non-REM, that we have stages of sleep at night. Most of the time we are on non-REM. We begin to fall off and we get into this state where there are 4 stages, very light sleep, and you're kind of awake and you're not awake. You onset sleep, you're disengaged from the environment, and the good things, as I mentioned before, start happening. The very good things. Your breathing and heart rate are very regular. Your body temperature goes way down. And then the deepest, most restorative part, even better things happen. Your blood pressure drops, your breathing is slower, and you regain some energy. And all of these hormones that we spoke about earlier are released for growth, development, and just feeling mentally much clearer the next day. Next, please. And REM stands for rapid eye movement. Occurs about an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours after you first fall asleep, and increases over the later part. And this is the part really where it provides the boost for the brain and the boost for the dreams. First of all, there's active, begin to see the eyes dart back and forth. The body really becomes immobile during REM sleep. And I've heard it referred to in some of the literature as a paralysis during REM. So there really is a complete shutdown of muscles, breathing, heart rate changes. And this is really important for daytime performance and getting all those memories together and having the ability to retrieve those memories. When you see someone you haven't seen in a long time and you recognize them, or you remember a name or something of that sort. So this is very important. And sadly, as we get older, folks, our REM is much less than when we were younger. Normally, we go through these stages on the chart from stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a block of REM, and then we're down again with the other stage, and then back. So most people go in and out of REM sleep at least 3, 4, 5 times a night. Next. So unfortunately, as we get older, this REM sleep period decreases, and in some older folks, normally over the age of 80, we may not see any REM sleep whatsoever, 80, 85. And some, I say, and some people maintain good REM throughout their lives to the very end. So we know that statistically there are, lots of people admit, about 500,000 people admit to their doctors or bring it up that they're got a sleep problem. And there are many disorders of sleeping. And most of them, all of them actually lead to lower quality of life. And some sleep disorders are life-threatening, like certain types of sleep apnea. Next, please. Now, why do we have, this is what you're all here for, right? This is what I try to think about in my own life. Why are people having older people? Well, older people are taking more medication or they're over-medicated. The average person over 65 is on average 6 different medications, 6 to 8 different medications a day, which means for everyone that's not taking anything, like my mother-in-law, there's someone taking 12 or 14 different medicines a day. So that's a lot of medication. There are a lot of side effects when you're putting all those medications into your body. These days, we go to all the specialists. We go to the pulmonologist, the urologist, the internist, pulmonologist, whoever, and everyone is giving us different medications, and sometimes they are mixed up. Not so much if you're savvy about it and you're looking them up, but the average population really has a problem with side effects of medication. Alcohol too, many older folks have a glass of wine before they go to sleep, or a drink, which gets them to sleep faster, but has a rebound effect on waking them up during the night more. They have less, it's been found that they have less REM sleep with alcohol before bed, and they're getting up earlier. So alcohol, while it seems like a good idea before you go to bed, actually has shown not to be. Sorry about that, folks. Next, causes of sleep disorders. The big one here is depression, causing sleep disorders of people of all ages, children, teenagers, adults of all ages. We see far more depression as we get older, much more common. And, the whole chicken or the egg thing, are we depressed because we're not getting enough sleep as a side effect, or are we not getting enough sleep because we're depressed? Not sleeping reduces appetite, losing interest and pleasures related to losses, and can be related to retirement. When you're not on that path of daily routine. Many of us, probably why I haven't retired yet, is losing the kind of the status and the role and the respect of being whoever we are. So I think the more we define ourselves we have defined ourselves as who we were, the harder it is to recreate that loss, and try to get a channel into other activities. Next, please. And I'm not going to get into this. Most of you know about assessment of depression. All right, and this is now the DSM-5 of depressed mood, 4 of 8 symptoms. So you look at these 8 symptoms, and which 4. If you have 4 or more of them, you get a diagnosis of depression. Older folks like us, they miss our diagnosis very, very often. Those of you in gerontology, geriatrics, and psych know that as we get older, there is an energy loss. There are some concentration problems. Maybe people are moving slower, more motor retardation, worthlessness, guilt, but whatever, appetite or weight change. Some of these are really age-related and may not be depression. So they're very old. Sometimes they're very overlooked by the physician or the treating practitioner. Next, please. So the next 2 pages really are, as we all know, there are scales that measure everything, right? This is a sleep scale that sleep specialists do. You know, when do you fall? What's your level of daytime sleepiness? What are you doing? Sitting, reading, watching TV, in a theater, or in a car for an hour without a break, lying down to rest in the afternoon, sitting, talking to someone. If you fall asleep while you're sitting talking to someone, there's really one of 2 things happening. Either you haven't gotten enough sleep, or they are boring the heck out of you and you don't want to hear it anymore. So that's hard to assess. That's very personal. Yeah, any quiet, being in a car, stop the traffic, very serious. So this is one of the scales. The next scale, Diana, please, is the severity of the fatigue. You know, what happens when you're tired? What brings it on? Does it happen easily? Okay, and so forth and so on. Does it get in the way of your life? Okay, do you consider it disabling? Does it interfere with your work, your family, your social life? And these are scores that sleep experts give people to give patients to see how severe their problem is. Next, please. So there's, lots of problems, really causes of sleep disorder. Loss of a loved one seems to be right up on top, especially in later life. It triggers all of these things: insomnia, depression, sleep problems for months, sometimes as much as 6 months or a year. And the recommendation you would think would be medication or whatever, but usually it's support groups that help, maybe in combination with some other interventions. Next, please. Retirement, you're all aware of course, changes in all of these things. And some people linked to depression, the role I mentioned before, identity loss, and the need to kind of retool, your sleep-wake cycle that you've been doing for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, or getting something else to do. Next, please. Here, we're getting into the part of my talk that really has to do with what causes sleep problems. And all of these 2 things do: caffeine, eating heavy meals, exercising too late in the day, hospitalization, recovery after surgery, travel, times of worry, times of stress, all of these things and more. So you really have to think about your lifestyle and what's happening, and why that can cause that kind of a problem. Yeah, ASPS, going to bed. I'm going to skip over that. Go to bed early, going to bed early. So if you're tired, and doctors say, if you're tired, go to sleep. I've heard that. People tell me that. So if you're tired at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, you go to sleep. What happens? You wake up at 3, 4 o'clock. You finish your 6 to 8 hours of sleep, and there you are up in the middle of the night. And some people tell me that that's the best time. They get up and they do chores, or they write, or they do whatever they need to do. But there is that kind of a problem. It really curtails your night activities a lot. And, who wants to be awake when everybody else is sleeping? Or maybe they like it better that way, depending on who you're, I guess, sleeping with. Physiological changes with age, of course, energy. These are all very... you can list them all. Sleep apnea is a big deal in later life. A restless leg twitches. As I mentioned, decrease in this deep REM sleep, snoring, and so forth. So these are physiological changes with age that happen normally, and are not really considered to be such a problem until you get to sleep apnea, which can be a real problem, as I'm sure many of you know. And may require interventions or mechanical help. Next. Okay, weight gain, exactly, too. So what can be done? Here we are. You take medication for depression. Well, first you have to be diagnosed and convincing that it is depression. Curtailing the naps is a big deal. I could probably take a nap at 2 o'clock every afternoon, but I know if I did, it would influence my sleep. Activities to stay awake, light therapy for some people, getting outside, taking a walk when you're tired, getting exercise, and certainly mandibular oral appliances that dentists make for snoring that will help not only the snorer get a better sleep, but the person who is next to the snorer who is being kept awake by snoring. Next. Weight loss, of course. Now, how do you get help for this? So, when is it a problem? And I remember back in, the Army days, the problem is, how long is it a problem before you really need to do something about it? So I'd say people should give themselves 3-4 weeks of bad sleep before they really seek some help. Very often it's something that's on your mind, something that's not resolved, a bad situation, maybe a bout with some illness, maybe some medication that you're taking. So they say to give it some time before you actively ask for help. And we know that sleepiness during the day is a problem. It affects with your normal activities. And if you find yourself, canceling a meeting or canceling a social engagement or canceling a bridge in the afternoon because you're too tired, that's a sign that it's interfering with your normal ADL. Sleep specialist, sleep disorder clinic, do all of these things. I would venture to guess of all of 70 or 80 of you out there, that probably maybe close to half of you have had some kind of a sleep intervention at a sleep clinic. It is very common, monitoring people for a diagnosis. Next, please. Yeah, medications, of course, we have medications for everything now. So the problem with sleeping pills, the effects of them last longer as we age. Our muscle mass, our body mass, our fat mass changes with age. Our absorption of medication, you all know, changed with age. So the regular dose, can be an overdose for us. And there's a tendency among older folks that if one works, I'll try two, and that'll work better. So the name of the game are things that are shorter acting. They're actually still using halcyon or restorol for sleep problems. Not so much. That used to be the way to go. Not too much anymore. These are strong sedatives, halcyon, restorol. Newer, Ambien, Sonata, Lunesta, much safer medications. My personal, I know I shouldn't say, what is my personal use of any medication when I can't sleep is I take an antihistamine. I take like 25 milligrams of Benadryl. That helps me. Helps me with my allergies too, but it also helps me get to sleep better. The problem with all these medications, including antihistamines, is if one works, I'll try 2 or 3, and then you've got a problem. Many people nowadays are using melatonin for not only sleep, but they're saying they're actually marketing some melatonin for better immune response. And I think what they're saying is it's not really the melatonin, because they haven't really studied melatonin well, that it's probably the good night's sleep that you're getting from the melatonin that keeps your immune response better. I would think. Just again, I'm not the expert. Next. So what is sleep hygiene? It's really, what do I have to do? The absolute best thing, the research has really shown that try to go to sleep the same time and get up the same time, no matter what. That keeps you on a cycle. Your body knows you're ready to sleep. Go to sleep only when you're tired. And this pre-sleep ritual is really important. Your body actually knows when sleep is around the corner. What do you do before you go to bed? Well, you may take your regular night medication, maybe, but you may take a warm shower. You may get your things ready for the next day. And so if you have a nice routine, especially a relaxing routine that includes something relaxing, is very important. Keeping this regular schedule and avoiding caffeine before you go to bed. Again, 15% of the population can have a double espresso a half hour before they go to bed and sleep like a baby practically. Very small population can do that, but there are people that can. Hopefully it's some of you. And avoiding liquids, hard to do, avoiding alcohol. Next, please. And using the bathroom. Oh, this is an important one. Nowadays, this was in an interesting article I just read in a psychology journal about nowadays with COVID, people are doing everything in the bedroom. The bedroom has been a place, it's become a dining room, it's become an office, it's become a place to sleep, it's become so many things, and especially when everyone in the family is in the house, in the apartment, and you're looking for space. So we've always said use the bedroom only for sleep and sex, that's it. Putting a big television screen and using it as a home theater as well is something that's a little stimulating for the brain. I'll talk about that again. Actually curtail the screen time and use a screen dimmer. I'm one of these people that I'm very last minute. I have a lecture the next morning. I'm reviewing my slides the night before, and I have my laptop open looking at the slides, or I'm checking my email. My grandson was sleeping over one night and said, Grandma, that you can really make that screen dimmer, and taught me how to dim the screen on my phone after 9 o'clock and dim the screen on my computer. So I didn't know, you probably all know that, but to do that. So these are all also foods that have been known to help. Tryptophan increases the serotonin, and all of these foods, milk, warm milk, turkey, peanuts, so forth. Oddly enough, a bowl of cereal with bananas, but not too sweet cereal, they say. So careful with that. You get your potassium, which is great for sleep too, with your bananas, and avoiding certain combinations of food that you can see. Okay, next. Avoid smoking close to bedtime. Avoid smoking all the time. One of the courses I teach is tobacco cessation for the practitioner. And you shouldn't be smoking no matter what. But those of you who have the bad addiction, don't do it close to bedtime, because the nicotine will keep you boosted. If you take a nap, do it at the same time. Avoid sleeping pills. Analyze your environment. I don't know if you've noticed, as much as I have noticed lately, that on television there are so many ads for mattresses, for sheets, for pillows, all of which are guaranteed to give you a better night's sleep. But it's not a bad idea to look at your bed, how comfortable your bed is, even if your bed is squeaking and waking you up when you turn over, or squeaking when your partner turns around and wakes you up. So look at the light, look at the noise, look at the clock, keep the clock away, and use a journal to understand these patterns. Next, I think we're almost done. Oh, we are done. Okay. So this is just like everything you ever wanted to know. I'm sure you knew many of these things, but just haven't done them, or don't do them enough so that it influences how well you sleep. But certainly we all feel our very best after a good night's sleep. And we all tend to be a little cranky and disruptive individuals when we haven't had enough. So one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, I started to say before, is because I wanted to hear what you have to say. I know Marty uses the term conversations that you have in your epic talks. So I would like to hear the conversation, and I'd like to hear what everyone else is doing or not doing to get a better night's sleep.
Well, just if I could offer one comment. You've answered a couple of my questions. One is, I've noticed when I try to go for the old 3-mile walk for exercise, if I do it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's very hard. If I do it late morning, just before lunch, much easier to do. Also, I use an e-reader at night in bed. And if I turn down the light intensity on the e-reader, it makes it much better, and I go to sleep much faster. So,
Okay. I should share one thing before, so I don't forget. I use a sound machine next to my bed with a very soft white noise sound that kind of gets rid of all any background noise or my husband snoring or anything like that. I also use earplugs. I don't have to listen to him either. So, Marty, you know Bill, right? I think Janet does too.
I have a question and a comment. Jean started when she introduced you telling us that she wakes up at 3:30 in the morning. Now I go to bed at 3:30 in the morning, and I'm definitely a night owl and have always been. Now that I'm retired, I can afford to doing this. And it's my understanding there have been studies, sleep studies, where people are deprived of light or anything and just find out their own rhythm. And people have different rhythm, I guess, genetically determined. And I'm definitely a night person. I sleep well, but I don't get tired before 2 or 3 o'clock, and sometimes even 4 in the morning. So, Jean, we could share the same bed. You go first, and I go second.
Heidi,
What do you know about these sleep patterns?
Sorry?
What about these sleep patterns? Do you
No,
know?
you're absolutely right. You know, I couldn't talk about everything, but I think we all have our own little circadian rhythm comfort zone where we're better, you know, at night or in the morning, and our rhythm is just not the same. And I think, you know, when you're like that all your life, don't change, right?
But I couldn't afford doing this when I was working. I had to force myself to become a morning person. But I also read that night owls, as I am, actually, on average, have a shorter lifespan. It is healthier to be a morning person. I don't know why that should be so, and whether that's really proven or whether this is just a suggestion.
Interesting.
Well, there's a lot of data on shift work, and the really severe adverse health effects of people being forced to work shifts, including increased risks for cancer, for things that are immunologically related. And so that's incontrovertible. But the question of night owls versus larks versus owls is an interesting one. I just wonder, I mean, I've always my whole life, I always got up at 4 so that I could write and do that. And I wonder how much of what we consider sleep disturbance is that we don't feel that we're conforming to what everybody else thinks we ought, when everybody else thinks we ought to be sleeping. What do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think we all, in so many aspects of our lives, we think that we may be the odd man out doing something different than other people, and that it's wrong. But I don't know. I'd like to hear what other people have to say about that. It's such an interesting point. Someone better say something, because I'm going to grab some water.
I'll pipe up. I think it's really the quality of the sleep more, is probably more important than what time you decide to go to bed and then wake up. You know, it's the notion of continually waking up once you fall asleep and how that interrupts the patterns. That is probably, I know for me, that's what's problematic, and for many people I know. But I don't think it's the time. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to wake up purposely at 4 to study if I had an exam, because I could retain more then. I can at night. So, you know, and I also do much better early in the morning. And other people, you know, as is it Heidi who said it, is, you know, you can go to bed later, but I think it's maintaining a routine, which is very, very important for everything we do, no matter what that routine is, and how to try to make sure you can get a quality sleep that is minimum, you know, where you're interrupted in a minimum way, and so forth. The LED lights are killers.
Oh, killers, absolutely.
And the other piece with that is that a habit that I'm breaking myself of, and I find it very helpful, is if I do wake up during the night, I no longer look at the clock. That immediately increases people's anxiety and worry if you see what time it is.
Good point. Yeah.
You know, and if, you know, some things that I've been reading about is if you don't look at the clock, you just, you know, until you're supposed to wake up or however you do wake up, it actually enables one to fall back asleep faster. And it really does seem to work.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. So certain amount of anxiety looking at the clock and realizing that it's the middle of the night and you're not ready to wake up yet. Yeah, yeah. I made one of the biggest mistake purchases I've ever made in my life, although I love it, is I bought this Timex clock, plug-in electrical clock that has, it shows the time on the ceiling right over my bed. It was really helpful when I was working, right? Very much, and it gave me an idea of where I was. But you're absolutely right, Janet. Thank you. I'm going to throw that right in the garbage tonight.
What is the oxygen saturation you need to be maintained at before it's a concern? I monitor my oxygen saturation continuously.
Uh-huh.
I'm wondering if it stays above 90, is that adequate? Or what fraction of the time it can go below 90 and still not be a problem?
Well, I'm not a physician, but I know that above 90 is what I've heard as well.
Above 90.
Above, that's what I've heard. I don't know. Anybody else know anything more about that?
Yeah. One more thing. When I had a sleep study done at an esteemed institution whose name I won't mention, by a physician who was truly a very distinguished physician. And so the sleep study was done. And I think about 5 o'clock, I woke up and I couldn't get back to sleep. And it turned out that in my report, I got a notion that my REM was down because of age. This was alarming to me because for many reasons I won't go into. So I set up a video recording with a security camera, so they work in infrared. And I found I had plenty of REM sleep towards the evening, towards the morning, just before I wake up. So the thing that I'm inclined to think is that the first night effect, which has recently been studied and shown that this one hemisphere is sleeps much more soundly in a novel environment, was the problem. I just had a very light sleep because of the first night effect. And the whole thing was an artifact, or at least much of it was an artifact. So it seems to me that our system is kind of clogged up with the cost of a sleep study and the fact you can't get insurance to do them, but you really need something at home so you can monitor over time and get a real measurement. Because a snapshot, it's like saying, what's the weather today? Well, it's not typical necessarily, right? So that's been my experience. I just thought I'd pass it on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certainly monitoring is a good intervention. It's good to monitor lots of things in our lives, especially now in our lives. But this idea of regularity and predictability, and the term sleep hygiene, that it's a way of, if you think of doing all these things correctly to block the possibility of having a poor night's sleep. There's so much that, I'm a behavioral scientist. What am I going to say? I'm not going to say medicine or gadgetry or anything like that. I'm thinking that we as human beings have done so much to kind of navigate our lives behaviorally to make our lives better, that we should continue doing so. I mean, that's my approach.
Is deep breathing. If you wake up and having trouble go back to sleep, if you take a lot of deep breaths, it really is extremely helpful.
Thank you for that.
And looking at the clock, I always look at the clock when I wake up, and it's goody, I've got 2 more hours to sleep. So I think that's totally idiosyncratic. I mean, some people it's not a bad idea, and other people it's a good idea. And once I had somebody who told me, "Oh, it's terrible, this business of only use your bed for sleeping and sex." But I read in bed I always read in bed before I go to sleep. And I don't care what anybody says about you're not supposed to.
I always think that has something to do with what you're reading. You don't want to read anything that's too provocative. It's gonna. You don't want to read. Anything political gets me all riled up. So I try to stay away from the newspaper.
Common for people who are older to wake up after 4 hours and then
Yes. Yes, without a doubt. I mean, that chart that I showed was kind of a poor sketch about that, but you have these awakening periods, many, I mean, we're talking dozens of times. Some of the times people aren't even aware of it unless, like William mentioned, he's had sleep studies that measure all of these awakening patterns. And I think then we would know, but I think it's very common. Having to, urinate is a big problem too. If we don't stop drinking water at least 2 hours before we go to bed, we're going to get up and urinate, for many reasons, not just because we're drinking water late, but because of our physiology, changing physiology.
I just wanted to add that sleep is now an issue, not just for us oldies, but for the whole society.
Oh,
We
yeah.
found out that over 50% of workers come to work tired in the morning. And when I used to take public transportation to go to work, half of the people are sleeping in the morning on the way to work. So it's not just us who has problems about 65. The other issue that concerns me personally, as many of you probably too, is sleep deprivation in children. And most of us have grandchildren. I have a 15-year-old grandson, and school starts at 8, and school bus picks him up shortly after 7, so he has to get up at 6 o'clock and goes to bed maybe 11 o'clock. So he has 7 hours of sleep. For a teenager, that's not enough. And this has become also a public issue that schools should probably not start at 8, but why not start at 9? Because people can retain much more of what they learn if they are not tired. And if the majority of students are tired at 8 in the morning, it's not good. So I think the sleep problem is a big societal problem, not just affecting us older people.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, Heidi. Then you have to think about what's going on in the world. There's so many things. We can say, yes, COVID has been an issue and we're worried about this, worried about that. I was trying to get the vaccine a couple of months ago, and trying to get hooked up to where to get it. And, my friends the stress of COVID has been unbelievable, especially for us. I mean, we are the vulnerable group who may not stand such a great chance if we get sick. So we're concerned about vaccination. We're concerned about our children, our grandchildren who are not going to school and have all kinds of other issues because they're not in school, they're not socializing, especially your 15-year-old grandson. That teenagers have to socialize as part of the developmental process.
He actually goes to school full time. It's in Colorado, private school. They go, and they have once in a while a COVID case, and then they're all tested. But they have regular school, which
Yeah, I know. My grandchildren are in the city, and they don't go to school. But you're absolutely right. Many of our grandchildren and our children are deprived of work environments and school environments. And obviously we're putting families together for 24/7 with quarantine and so forth. And it's a big change in the pattern of life for all of us.
And then many of them are now on the computer just before they fall asleep, which is also very bad for sleep.
What a good point that is, right?
I think that the emotional problems associated with aging, loneliness, increasing awareness of failing body parts and loss of cohort, all of these things combine, and we haven't. There are not adequate studies of how all of this, how we are the first cohort to be living this long, and nobody has really done adequate studies of the interactions between emotional state, physical state, sleeping, and well-being. I, for one, can't wait till theater and music comes back, because then I know that a few days a week I'm out and don't come home till 11 or 12, and your life, you have a life again.
A life, yeah. That's such. I always say to students when I teach aging, I always say, all of us who are together right now, we are like a trial study where we're a stage 3 trial of life. As long as we, thank God, we have lived, considering life expectancy has really gone up so dramatically. They say, except for this past year, life expectancy actually went down 1 year due to COVID, but otherwise, way, way, way up. life expectancy in 100 years ago? Yeah, 100 years ago, life expectancy was 46. Can you imagine? I mean, wow.
Well, but much of that was due to maternal mortality and childhood mortality.
Exactly.
Once you made it to like 60 or 65, your life expectancy was not that drastically different from what it is now. It was
True.
So life
True.
expectancy.
Yeah, once you've made it to 65, you have another at least 20 more years life expectancy.
Right.
But then again, the difference between life expectancy and lifespan, life expectancy may be, 85 when you're 65. Okay, how long the average person lives, but our lifespan really is much more. So, how many times do we read about people who are, in their 100+ birthdays?
Really
Well, there
more,
was this.
for women.
Hey, Ruby, hi Ruby. I didn't see you there. How are you?
I was going to say for women, childbirth was a major cause of death not so many years ago and still remains an issue. But I was wondering about how many people are not sleeping well because they were inactive all these months of hibernation. Because I fortunately have been swimming, and without that, I don't sleep well. I walked a lot, but until the pool opened, I really had a bigger problem at night. But fortunately now that's solved.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the activity, I hadn't even thought about that. Your activity level can be so much drastically changed by being quarantined, right? Even during the winter, when you're not out and about and walking in the park as much. So, these are all important considerations. Great ideas you all have. Great.
I try to walk 4 or 5 miles a day.
Oh, good. That's great.
Come on.
I just want to echo what Ruby said. I mean, this self-discipline of exercising and at least walking, can walk around the block, or if you're close to the Central Park here as I am, walk in the park. It makes such a difference in sleep and in your wakefulness while during the day as well. One other story I wanted to share that I recently read, and maybe some of you read it too. One of the oldest women alive, 117 years old in France, a nun, caught COVID and recovered.
Oh.
Celebrated her 117th birthday, recovered from COVID.
Prayer.
And prayer. So I hope I've at least raised your consciousness a little bit about all of our good and bad habits that may influence your night's sleep. And God, some of the contributions you made have really made me think twice about my daily routine, and especially that deep breathing. I'm going to try that.
I'm not willing to give up my glass of wine at dinner.
Go right ahead. At dinner's okay, I guess. I don't know.
I guess you could move dinner till 4. But that's the other thing the other thing to think about is how the human race has been transformed by electricity, which is only a little bit more than a century, because before there was adequate lighting, you were forced to live your life according to the rising and the falling of the sun. And so it's a really open question as to how much of the way we live and are is artificial. Who knows what is good.
Yeah.
On the other hand, human beings are living far longer than they have ever lived in human history, I guess, except for Moses and Medusa. But does anybody else have any hints about what helps them fall back asleep?
I had a glass of milk with honey. this morning, I woke up at 3 o'clock, read until 5 o'clock, and then had a glass of warm milk with honey. And I went back to sleep.
Locking the
I
cat
have
out of your bedroom is a good idea.
I have a
That's a good idea, locking the cat out of your bedroom.
Yes.
one
Yeah.
question I have is about sleep. What I find is I go to sleep. What you described is very much fits what happens with me, and I'll wake up and I fall back asleep. But one of the concerns I had was I usually can get a good amount of sleep between 11, 12 o'clock and about 5 or 6 in the morning. And then they say you should get about 7 or 8 hours. Does it making up for it during the day? Does that help, or is it not as helpful to?
What I've read is that you can't make up lost sleep. Now, if anyone wants to research that, but you made me think of the fact that everyone has their own amount of required sleep. Some people really need, 10 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep, and some people function well on 6 hours of sleep. They say 6 to 8 hours of, over 65, 6 to 8 hours of sleep is recommended. But some people less, I suppose, and some people may need more. But this napping during the day seems to really affect all of these things.
That's one of the things I really enjoy.
Yeah, me too. Me too. But, sometimes I'll grab a cup of coffee instead of a nap,
Yeah, right.
which is difficult to do in my office.
Yeah. No, I find trying to do the nap in mid-afternoon is better than
Right.
later for me. But
Yeah.
Well, one thing we know that we all share a problem. So.
Yeah. Raise your hand if you don't have a problem with sleep, right?
So maybe we need to decide whether it is a problem or not. Maybe that's, it's like, I remember years ago when I used to do women's health, people would, one of the big, huge fights was that all the norms that were used for blood levels were based on young white males, which didn't necessarily reflect what a female needed for blood levels. And I just wonder if maybe we should just stop worrying about it, since we seem to be puttering along pretty darn well. And we're going to go visit my 99-year-old mother-in-law in a couple of weeks now that we're vaccinated. And so perhaps we need some redefinitions of norms.
Yeah, such a good point. I wonder if someone did do some research on sleep issues, problems, people having problems sleep, how many hours of sleep and so forth they've had from, let's say 6 months ago till 6 months from now. Are people really sleeping better since they've been vaccinated and feel more comfortable? Obviously your mental health is improved because you feel a little bit more protected. You can socialize a little bit more. So I would think there's this curve here that we'll probably see that when our mental health kind of improves, when our emotions get a little bit more positive about the future of this horrible problem, we'll probably all be a better place, much better place. Yeah.
Well, I want to, are there any last comments or questions from?
Just a lot of thanks. It was a wonderful presentation and discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you all so much. Number one, for inviting me. Number two, you give me some great ideas.
And now you can retire and join us.
And now I see half of you I've worked with or done research with or whatever over the years. And I'm saying to myself, I'm finished. This is my last year, right?
I have a last question. You haven't said much about dreaming.
About
And
what?
recently reading an article about lucid dreaming,
and attempts to communicate with people while they are lucidly dreaming. Do you think that dreams have any special importance in sleep hygiene?
Well, I tell you, I have done a lot of research earlier in my life on this, and I continue to be very interested, Francis, in what you said. My take on dreams, I'm sure there are people that are disagreeing or agreeing, is that a dream is a combination of so many things: your previous memories, your previous thoughts, your wishes, your regrets, your stress points in your life, your previous experiences that go from, you know, the memory back here that comes up to the memory up in the front. That we should pay no attention to our dreams. And a lot of people who know a lot more than we all know about dreams say that it's such a mishmash of bits and pieces of our lives, and that we should not, you know, Freud would kill me for this, right? But, you know, this is what I'm hearing. I'm just sharing that.
Interesting. Any other last minute questions? Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for taking the time to share your.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Your enthusiasm is infective. And,
Okay, thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe I'll join your group at some point soon.
so for those of you who are still on, we're going to have a cocktail party on the 12th, I think, and we're starting a new collaboration with the music department so that we'll have students perform regularly.
Oh, nice.
Our next graduate scholar is Dan Tice is arranging for a musician.
Oh, great.
We'll do this on a regular basis, and I would love for Epic to really firm up, you know, many ties with the music department, since that is such a love of so many of us here. So good to see you all, and
Good to see you.
Bye-bye.
Be well, be safe.